I thought this was very interesting because of all the documents that leaked and stuff. So,
Okay.
I don't know if you guys heard about the Google employee who was, now there's debate over whether she was let go or quit.
Right.
But she basically, I'm going to just give you the brief overview, and we can read through the article.
Yep.
Basically, from my understanding of reading about this, she is the head of AI. This part that focuses on AI, but on racial and gender issues, and it's the DIE. It's the diversity,
Yeah, her
inclusion,
title was
equity.
her title was actually technical co-lead of the ethical AI team. So I
Okay.
think it was all ethics, not just die ethics, but
Right,
that I'm
but
sure that was a huge focus.
they're focusing on dye
Yeah.
ethics, okay? And she was working on a paper. It didn't meet their standards for publication. They told her they would not be publishing it. She threw a fit and wanted to know which people at Google had critiqued the paper for them to unmask these people and tell her who they were. Or she was going to be quitting. She basically made a list of demands. This is what social justice people do. They make demand. They're used to making demands. They do
And
it at
then getting their
colleges. They do
way.
it in jobs, and then they get their way. Terrorists also make demands. So she made a list of demands and said, "Or I'm taking my ball and going home." And so they said, "Well, you can take your ball and go home." And then all hell broke loose. And there's a petition, there's internal and external criticism now towards Google. How dare you fire this Black woman and who was working on DIE stuff, diversity, inclusion, equity stuff. How dare you? And there's an internal petition at Google now. And then what's his face had
Sundar
to come
Pichai.
out. Sundar Pichai had to come out and issue an apology. Anyway, let's get into the meat of it, though. I
Yeah.
want to read the article.
Because you and I might actually disagree a little bit on this,
Okay.
although very little bit. Mostly we would agree. So her name is Timnit Gebru. She actually is just in her, I don't know if this is her defense, because well respected in these kind of fields doesn't mean she's not a rabid, flaming social justice crazy.
Right.
But she is well respected. She's a well-known AI ethicist. And there are non-social justice AI concerns, as anyone who's afraid of the Borg would recognize. Like there are concerns about AI. And so, but of course, Google has a vested interest in moving AI forward. Like that's part of their strategic plan. So although she's a researcher there, she is going to run in, like if she starts to run afoul of what Google wants, they're not going to keep her on. Like that's just how it works. So let's look at, let's just go through an article, I guess. So this is her, Timnit Gebru. And here's basically what she did. She had this paper, as Carrie said. There is controversy over whether she submitted the paper on time, whether she's followed all the rules, blah, blah, blah. It didn't meet standards. I have heard counter arguments, and I want to give those counter arguments their due credit. The counter argument is basically, well, you make the rules very stringent, and then you only enforce them against people that you don't like. That's possible. People do that. Companies do that. And plenty of people have said, well, I've gotten papers published and this isn't when I broke these rules, they didn't fire me or they didn't do these things or like they didn't, they let me get away with it. So they're applying these rules unfairly to this person. However, my suspicion here is that there's always context. When someone leaves a company like this, it's not going to be just about only this incident. She's a particular person who's had a particular personality, who's done particular things at Google and has possibly, we'll see maybe why, possibly rubbed some people the wrong way and been a thorn in the side and kind of a pain in the effing ass. So it might just be the straw that broke the camel's back, which is why they're like, I'm just sick of this. Like, did she technically violate this? Yes. Okay, let's just get rid of this woman. Right?
That's what I was thinking too, because they're in a place now, once they become beholden to the ideology like Google has, we've talked about this before. Once you become beholden to it, you're in a place where if someone is not performing well, or if they are a difficult person to work with, or if they do make life hell for their fellow employees, if they are in any of the so-called marginalized groups, there's a fear of firing them.
Right.
So if she is, which I'm reading this, of course, I don't have no idea. I'm just what my gut tells me is I think she was probably a troublemaker or rubbed people the wrong way. And I bet when she said, if you don't meet my list of demands, I'm quitting, they were like, thank you, finally.
Right.
We can let her go.
That's how as an outsider, that's how I read. I've read both sides of this, right?
Yeah.
That's how I read this. As an outsider, I read this as like, did they technically just were they looking for a reason to fire her? Yes.
Yeah.
Did she deserve to have them looking for a reason to fire her? Yeah, probably. So it's like a little bit more nuanced, because there's one side saying like, oh, they're only applying these rules to her, blah, blah, blah. And there's the other side saying, well, she didn't meet these deadlines, blah, blah, blah. And technically, So was she actually, did she actually resign? I don't really care whether they want to call it resigning or not. She did kind of say, well, I won't work here anymore. And they were like, great. So yeah.
Oh
but
gosh, thanks for giving us
even
help.
Google
Goodbye.
can't deal with this all the time. So let's just take a look. So here's the article. So what she did after she was told she couldn't publish here, and this will give you an indication of the type of environment that she helps to foster at Google, which might explain why maybe management is eager to get rid of her. Now, I also just want to point out, this is not an individual contributor sending an email to a group. This is a manager. She's a leader on the ethics AI team, ethical AI team. So she probably had people report to her, I assume. She's a leader. She's in a management role of some kind. This is not an individual contributor sending this. So, okay, so she expressed frustration to the internal listserv Google Brain Women and Allies. Okay. So they have a listserv named Google Brain Women and Allies. That's a weird, I guess, Beverly, just bite your tongue with the grammar. Okay. So let's see what she posted. I'm going to skip the commentary. Let's just see what she posted to the listserv. Hi, friends. I had stopped writing here, as you may know, after all the micro and macro aggressions and harassment I received after posting my stories here. And then, of course, it started being moderated. Okay, so right off the bat, oh, this is the kind of person you are. You use words like microaggressions and, quote, harassment, like, I'm sure, right, after posting your stories. Okay. Recently, however...
Yeah. We're at a place now where people just throw that word harassment around willy-nilly and never back it up. I mean, I don't even trust that word anymore. If you say you're being harassed, I mean, I would like to see what you're calling harassment, because people have diluted that word to the point of it. A lot of times they just mean people disagree with me,
right? Yeah. I'm harassed because he says the world is not flat. Okay. So recently I was contributing to a document with a couple other people. They were dismayed by the fact that after all this talk, this organization seems to have hired 14% or so women this year. Sammy has hired 39 from what I understand, but he has zero incentive to do this. Now, I just have a recommendation for her. You know who you should talk to is James Damore. He wrote a whole paper about why this might be true. You may want to go call James. James might have some ideas about why it's difficult to find women engineers. Okay.
But instead you guys fired him.
Right. Yeah. Oh, is he not there anymore? I forgot. Yeah. Geez, it was so, yeah. So, yeah. All right. So, this is what she's saying. Again, she's a leader in the company, writing on a listserv to other people. What I want to say is, stop writing your documents because it doesn't make a difference. So what she's saying is, stop doing your work. Stop working. That's what she's saying. Stop working.
Stop working. It's a manager again.
Right. Stop working. She doesn't spell it die. She says DIE because she thinks she's being clever and hiding die.
DEI.
DEI, sorry, yeah, instead of DIE. The die OKRs that we don't know where they come from and are never met anyways. The random discussions that we need more mentorship rather than we need to stop the toxic environments that hinder us from progressing. The constant fighting and education at your cost. They don't matter. Okay, so this is a vent about how the company doesn't care, doesn't matter. She's, got to deal with harassment and microaggressions constantly. Don't even do your work. There's zero accountability. There's no incentive to hire 39% women. She says, there is no way more documents or conversations will achieve anything. We just, okay. I mean,
just
okay.
Give up. Quit.
Yeah, give up. We just had a Black Research all hands with such an emotional show of exasperation. Do you know what happened since? Silencing in the most fundamental way possible. Okay, so after this meeting, this is the silencing in the most fundamental way possible, and she's going to talk about her paper. Have you ever heard of someone getting feedback on a paper through a privileged and confidential document to HR? Does that sound like standard procedure to you? Blah, 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 blah. So she goes through. Now, interestingly enough, the guy who responded to her, I'll get back to hers in a minute, but the guy who responded to her says, this particular paper was only shared with a day's notice before its deadline. We required 2 weeks for this sort of review. Now, I've heard people say that that's not true. But if you read her posting here, she doesn't say that she submitted it prior to 2 weeks. So maybe it's technically true that she didn't submit it on time. Anyway, she says, I submitted it, and then right before I was going to go on vacation, they throw a meeting on my calendar that I wasn't, prepared for, a couple hours beforehand. No one would tell me what it was about, and they said, it's been decided that you need to retract the paper. So she went away, and she went and published the paper without going through the review process is what happened. So normally she's got to wait for a review process and then submit the paper for publication. She skipped it and just submitted the paper for publication. Now, according to other researchers at Google, that's a common thing that they do, and they don't get in trouble. But they said you got to retract it. And then she says this is her interpretation of the conversation. You're not worth having any conversations about this since you are not someone whose humanity, let alone expertise recognized by journalists, blah, 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 is acknowledged or valued in this company. So she's basically saying, I interpret this as...
they don't recognize my humanity.
Right. They don't recognize my humanity. Now, by the way, I guarantee she's getting paid at least... I know at least six figures, probably over $200K a year.
Yeah.
For
at least.
That's how much she's not valued.
We don't value your
by Google.
Humanity. And she's not just saying this is this crazy hyperbole that social justice people engage in, where they say, oh, you disagree with me? You don't think women are human. Or like, right. Oh, you disagree with me? You're denying my very right to exist. What? You don't recognize my humanity. And she's going further and saying they don't recognize any of your humanity either. All of you people in this group.
Right. So then she complains more. You ask for more information. They won't give you specific feedback. Your manager says they'll read you some stuff, blah, blah, blah. This is just a rant, right? This is the opposite of NAUWU, which is the nothing about us without us principle. Basically, you have to talk to Black people in order to manage them better. You can't do anything. You can't make any decisions that affect her without talking to her, I guess. And they're saying they're doing this in the context of responsible AI. She doesn't like that. She's just mad. But just to give you this is an insight into her history that she let slip. And I just, let's imagine again what she's been like at this company. This happened to me last year. I was in the middle of a potential lawsuit. She's talking about something she did last year. I was in the middle of a potential lawsuit for which Kat Hurler and I hired feminist lawyers who threatened to sue Google. Okay, so she's been threatening to sue her employer. I would call that a thorn in my side if I was an employer and she had a history of using lawyers to threaten to sue me over stuff that was disagreement.
Not just
anyway,
lawyers, Carter, feminist lawyers.
Yeah, that's even worse. And here she is. She probably, I mean, Kimberly Crenshaw is a feminist lawyer. Maybe she was one of the lawyers hired. I don't know. She's here in the Bay Area. She would be available. I bet she'd love to help on this. So if you would like to change things, I suggest focusing on leadership accountability and thinking through what types of pressures can also be applied, blah, blah, blah. The Congressional Black Caucus did some stuff. Basically, apply pressures externally, maybe from the government. But don't do your work. So the email from Jeff Dean, who is the supervisor. I don't think he's her direct supervisor. I think he might be the manager's manager. But he sends out an email after her departure saying, well, there's been a lot of speculation. She's no longer with us. It's a difficult moment for us, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of speculation and misunderstanding. Here's his version of events. He says, Timnit co-authored a paper with 4 fellow Googlers, as well as some external collaborators that needed to go through our review process, as is the case with all externally submitted papers. We've approved dozens of papers that Timnit and or the other Googlers have authored and then published, but as you know, papers often require changes during the internal review process, or are even deemed unsuitable for submissions. Unfortunately, this particular paper was only shared with a day's notice before its deadline. We required 2 weeks of this sort of review. And then instead of awaiting reviewer feedback, it was approved for submission and submitted. So she submitted it. Like I said, she bypassed the reviewer process. Now, he goes on and he explains the decision. And then he says, Timnit responded with an email requiring that a number of conditions be met in order for her to continue working at Google, including revealing the identities of every person who Megan and I spoke to and consulted as part of the review of the paper and the exact feedback. Timnit wrote that if I didn't meet these demands, she would leave Google and work on an end date. We accept and respect her decision to resign from Google. So, did they leap to that? Absolutely, they leapt to the resignation. Like, let's be clear. They leapt to the resignation. Do you blame them? I don't really. Yes. So here's the thing. She's claiming I didn't say I was resigning or would resign. It wasn't that big of a threat, blah, 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 right? That's what she's saying, but she could clear this whole thing up by releasing the email that she sent to Jeff Dean. But guess what she's not done?
Oh, yeah, she's not going to release that.
She hasn't released that email because that would clear things up. So let's not do that.
Elizabeth said in chat that she comes off as petulant in this bitch session that she's doing on the women at Google board. And she does. And I bet the email was even more petulant than this. And I bet it's embarrassing.